Good evening and welcome back to Center Point. I'm Joe Gum. We begin tonight with presidential politics and the fight against abortion, with the right to life emerging as a major issue for the general election, even before the nominees are chosen. The high-stakes New Hampshire primary is tomorrow, and the race for the Republican nomination became a two-person race last night when Florida Governor Ron DeSantis dropped out and endorsed former President Trump. It's now a two-person race between Trump and former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley, and Trump has a commanding lead in most polls. In the meantime, the Biden administration has dispatched Vice President Kamala Harris on a national abortion tour, sending her around the country to rally for more abortion access. President Biden thinks abortion is a winning issue for Democrats. We're joined now by Pastor Marc Little of No Longer Bound, an abortion recovery ministry. Pastor Little, thank you once again for joining us here on Centerpoint, sir. Always a pleasure.
Joe, you always invite me when there's just turmoil going on in the country. I'm glad to be back with you.
Well, we know that you are familiar with this and speak about this topic, of course, all the time. As we just mentioned, Vice President Kamala Harris hit the road in Wisconsin today. During her speech, she used several words. I want to point those out to you. She said that women across our great nation are suffering. In the meantime, President Biden called pro-life Republicans cruel. So those two words, suffering and cruel. You and your wife have an abortion recovery ministry where you've actually worked with women before who have suffered through the process, and they have gone through a situation that's pretty cruel. So my question to you is, why do pro-abortion activists care so much about what happens during the birth of a baby once they get pregnant, but they don't seem to talk a lot about the truth and the process after the abortion? Why is that?
Thank you, Joe. There's cruelty in abortion. And they want to talk about just the one that they want to share, what the mother is going through, the mother that doesn't want to give birth. They want to talk about that. They don't talk about what happens to the child, the life. It's actually a life. God said in Jeremiah 1:5, I knew you before you were born in your mother's womb. They don't want to talk about what they have the fetus go through, the fetus that feels pain. They don't want to talk about what happens after an abortion to men and women. Men and women are broken. There are symptoms from having had an abortion. It's called post-abortion syndrome. Men and women experience it, but particularly women. They become promiscuous, they become angry, they become suicidal. So what they're doing is they're promoting brokenness. And what they're not saying is, this really is not a political issue, Joe. This is a moral issue. For a moral people, the United States was formed and built on a Judeo-Christian ethic. And we really have to call that out. Because even in this election coming, in 2024, Roe v. Wade is not on the ballot. Abortion now, rightly under the Constitution, has been sent back to the states under the 10th Amendment. And so we're going to have that battle state by state. And so Kamala Harris coming out and talking about how cruel we are, here's the part that she's missing. Back in California when she was the Attorney General, they don't talk about how the investigative journalist found that Planned Parenthood was in fact selling fetal parts, fetal tissue. And instead of investigating Planned Parenthood, now with evidence that they had committed a crime, Kamala Harris went after the investigative journalist for criminal penalty. And then she had his home seized and seized his personal items to do what? To give them to Planned Parenthood, who was in a battle with the journalist. So this is the person who is the hitman for Planned Parenthood. And now we have to listen to her go around the country, talk about an issue that we should be talking about with love and care. How to care for mothers and fathers who have an unplanned pregnancy. How to talk about how to help the church and the community and families even support someone who has an unplanned pregnancy. That's what we do in our ministry and in the crisis pregnancy clinics that, by the way, the government won't allow to be funded with taxpayer dollars the way Planned Parenthood is. And so we've got a culture war. We need to call it what it is. We need to tell mothers and fathers to search the scriptures before you call Planned Parenthood. Search your community of believers, of Christians, who might have a word to share with you about what the Bible says. The Bible says in Psalm 139, 15 through 16, that we are fearfully and wonderfully made. He formed us in secret. That's what we need to tell people, that we have the image of God in the womb, the Imago Dei, and it's very precious to him.
Let's switch gears here. Great stuff there, as usual. And, of course, the pro-abortion activists, they're not just fighting, but they're going to pounce. Right. And so I like the charge that you gave people of faith, getting out there, praying, pushing back. Senator Tim Scott is demanding answers from the Treasury Department. This was news this week after reports that it had asked banks, the Treasury Department, to be alert to customer transactions such as purchasing Bibles as a sign of violent extremism. This comes after the FBI, of course, was caught putting religious Catholics under surveillance as what they called extremists. So my question to you is, Pastor, why is the Biden administration casting so much suspicion on people of faith? Because after the Iowa caucuses, we saw where networks delivered their punch and pounced on Christians, calling them cultists, calling them extreme, and of course, another name, white nationalists. Why is there a fight in this election cycle? And it's just not now. It's been happening for a long time.
You know, interestingly enough, when Republicans talk about their policies, the Democrats very easily, the other side, they like to call it a dog whistle, but it's interesting in this debate, nobody's calling this a dog whistle. This is a fear tactic, both the abortion issue and what's happening in the government with the IRS and other agencies. The assault is on Christians. And so we should be calling out that why is it okay for our government to tell banks, to tell the IRS, to go after Christians, to locate who we are for fear that we might be voting as Republicans. I think that we have a fundamental issue and problem in our country when it's okay for the government to be attacking a group that is protected under the First Amendment to freely express our beliefs as we wish. And I think that we've got to start pushing back and even calling our representatives to say this is a violation of our First Amendment right to freely express our religion, in this case, Christians. They're only going after Christians. They closed our churches, didn't they, Joe, in 2020? By the way, while the churches were closed, Christian churches, the strip clubs were open. So there is a very clear bias that has happened, that is happening, and we really do have to stand up and say it is not okay to target Christians or people of faith in particular, in general rather, who are protected under the First Amendment of the Constitution.
And of course, this isn't going to end anytime soon, because you and I discussed this almost 2 weeks ago with the story that came out from Johns Hopkins, where the chief diversity officer, and part of her list that she called privileged, the Christians were mentioned in that. So give us your charge or the message to viewers right now about pushing back on that. Because if we do push back on it, what does the networks say? What does the media say? They're going to call us cultish, extreme, outrageous, use any adjective that's out there. So what do we do under a minute? Give us that charge.
I'd be happy to. I wish I could pray. I'll do that next time. But I tell you, what we've got to do is we really have to look at the whole pie to understand what's happening. Because we can't give someone a charge if they don't have a broad understanding of what's happening. This attack against Christianity has been happening a long time. It just hasn't been as overt. And so when they are telling kids that they can't choose their sex at birth, they're not a girl or a boy. When they are telling children that it's okay for a boy to say he's a girl and participate in sports, to sideline their dreams. There's a bigger picture here when they're telling men and women, get rid of that child, you don't need it. So what we've got to do, we've got a representative government. We need to act like it, and we need to let our representatives know that we don't accept this.
All right, great stuff as always, Marc Little. We appreciate you joining us here on Centerpoint. Great stuff as always, and of course this will continue, so we'll have you back on.